A very good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today in this lecture class. I am Tulip, moderator for the session, and I'm deeply honored to have Ms. Simran Brar and Ms. Shreya Gupta as our esteemed speaker. Thank you all for joining us today in the lecture class. Ms. Simran is a principal associate at Karanchawala and Company. She is an advocate practicing civil and commercial litigation as well as arbitration for the last 15 years, of which she has been handling the arbitration team at Karanchawala and Company for the last 3 years. She is also a member of the ICCYAF. She is an economics graduate from St. Stephen's College and has a law degree from Delhi University. Ms. Shreya Gupta is a managing associate at Barucha and Partners in Mumbai. She has represented and advised clients on a wide range of corporate commercial disputes across business sectors. Her practice ranges across the Supreme Court and High Courts and arbitrations, including international commercial arbitration. She has been consistently called out for her exceptional precocity in adapting clients' business needs to fit within the legal requirements. She is well known for her advocacy skills and she has earned accolades from peers, counterparts, clients, and counsel for her uncompromising ethics and dedication to client service. Today's lecture class is on arbitration, territorial jurisdiction of courts, and seat versus rent debate. This class is organized by LegitQuest, which is an artificial intelligence-based legal research product. It is a state-of-the-art legal research platform for conducting legal research and is very well known for the introduction of the world's only one-click insight system called the iDraft Case Analytics. In short, the iDraft feature powered by artificial intelligence takes out the issue, facts, arguments, reasoning, and decision of a case law. LegitQuest recently has also started with Legiti, which has latest interviews, news, and columns, and serves the state affairs of the judiciary. Our today's session will be for 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A. I would request all our participants to be on mute and without video throughout the call, and all the questions to the speakers can be written in the chat box, which will be taken at the end of the session if the time permits. I will now hand it over to Simran ma'am.
Thank you, Tulip, and thank you to LegitQuest as well as to Mr. Karan Kalia for this opportunity to share my views on a rather interesting topic. I will be speaking largely about the seat debate with respect to the territorial jurisdiction of courts, with respect to the domestic arbitration scene at first, and if time permits, go on to the international. The topic has been a matter of much confusion, especially keeping in mind Bhatia International, etc. And it is only in the last 7 to 8 years that I think the Supreme Court has really laid down, laid to rest the confusion with respect to all of the, the current topic. So I would typically like to just first take everyone through the relevant sections of the Arbitration Act, which have been at the center of this controversy, and thereafter to the case laws to understand as to how the sections have now been interpreted conclusively, and thereon with some illustrative questions to understand practically how one can apply this. So I'll just refer to some notes with respect to the sections and case laws. The relevant sections really are section 2(1)(e) subsection 1, which relates to domestic. And that's one of the major sources of confusion in terms of, it uses the word, the courts having jurisdiction to decide the questions forming the subject matter of the arbitration, if the same had been the subject matter of a suit. So much of the confusion has arisen from the interpretation of these words or terms. But nonetheless, we shall see how it was eventually clarified by the Honorable Supreme Court. Second section is section 20 subsection 1, subsection 2, and subsection 3. So the third section that really is relevant to this is section 42, which actually also has been subject to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of differing opinions from different high courts. And this too has been laid to rest. Section 42 is pertaining to jurisdiction, which parties usually understand it to mean that whoever has the first mover advantage when there are more than one, when there is more than one territorial jurisdiction to approach, when the first mover, the party who moves first to either of the courts, is where the appropriate application, whether a section 9 or a section 11, would lie. So that too has been clarified very conclusively, and we shall see that from the case laws. There are 5 to 6 major judgments, with the most recent one really being in even as recent as March 2020. If I can just quickly tell you the ones I'll be referring to. That would be Balco of 2012, Indus Mobile of 2017, Union of India versus Hardy Exploration of 2019, BGS Soma of 2019, and HCC versus NHPC, which was pronounced in March 2020. So moving on to the first one. So the debate with respect to what is a seat, that really is the first and foremost before even coming to the point of which court has jurisdiction over a particular seat where the arbitration was conducted. So typically, parties, the confusion also arises because parties usually sort of confuse venue with seat. It is in Balco that the court conclusively, after again, referring to, it was largely an international case, but the principles laid down in Balco were followed and have been followed and continue to be followed. In Balco, the Honorable Supreme Court has held that Section 21, subsection 1, 20 subsection 1 and 20 subsection 2 really relate to the aspect of seat of the arbitration, whereas Section 20 subsection 3 really relates only to the venue. Now, relying upon it is now termed as the Shashowa principle, which was laid down by the UK courts. Relying upon the principles in that case, the Honorable Supreme Court finally, and as well as the UNCITRAL, as well as the New York Convention of 1958, UNCITRAL Model Law of 1985, the court really has held that if the parties, the Arbitration Act permits, the Section 20 subsection 1 permits the parties, it says free to choose a place. So place and seat, we have to understand, is used almost interchangeably. It is venue, which is a different concept from seat or place. But we'll stick to using the term seat. And it is since the parties are free to choose a seat, it doesn't matter whether there was a cause of action that arose at that seat, at that city or location, whether the agreement was signed, whether the defendant resides. At the beginning of the agreement, naturally the parties are not aware of all of that, where such things would occur. So once the parties to an agreement have decided and the agreement contains the place of arbitration, unless there is something to show that that was just merely to be a convenient venue for parties or for the tribunal, it will be held that that particular location is the seat of arbitration proceedings. So the Honorable Supreme Court also holds that the seat, that Section 20 is almost identical to the model law, UN Model Law of 1985, which makes it a very seat-centric legislation. And 21 is a very seat-centric legislation. And venue is only when the parties, for some convenience, assuming that a seat is at New Delhi, and the parties for convenience, say both the parties or the tribunal, live or reside in Gurgaon, then the parties choose to meet there on some occasions. That would be just for convenience. But the seat is chosen to be Delhi. Then further goes on, the Honorable Supreme Court further goes on to hold that once the seat is decided, the arbitration is anchored to a particular location. It is the court having territorial and supervisory jurisdiction over the said place, assuming it's Delhi. The courts having the natural supervisory territorial jurisdiction over such a seat would be the court, the appropriate court to approach, whether it is for a Section 9 petition, your injunctive relief, or a Section 11 for appointment of arbitrator. this is how the Supreme Court has really read Section 20, where the parties are free to choose a seat, with Section 2(1)(e) subsection 1, where much of the confusion has arisen with respect to which court will now oversee. Because in a case like where the seat was Delhi and the parties chose to have the arbitration in Gurgaon, they could tomorrow just go to the Gurgaon courts to say that this is where it was held. But now, as you will see in the line of judgments, that if the arbitration proceedings were to be conducted at Delhi and Gurgaon was only the convenient venue, once it's contained in the arbitration, that is what is going to be held to be the seat. And that is where the courts will have, it is the New Delhi courts that will have jurisdiction over the arbitration proceedings, as well as any appeals arising therefrom. So in Balco, I think largely this was laid down, though it covers more on the international aspect, which I won't be touching upon right now. So moving on to the second important case law, which is Mobile versus Datawind. This really is with respect to the domestic arbitration aspect and doesn't really go, is not on the international. So in this case, in the agreement, the parties had decided the venue to be Bombay. It is one of the parties who approached, because of the cause of action, one of the parties approached the Delhi court by way of a Section 9. So in terms of, again, what had been held in Balco, the court, the Delhi court actually erred in saying that jurisdiction of the Delhi court is made out because the party has approached the Delhi court first. Now, this is slightly where the section 42, since there was no, since the cause of action arose here, it applied again the principles of CPC and said since the cause of action arose here and the party approached the Delhi court, so this is where the Section 9 petition would lie. So Indus Mobile approached the Honorable Supreme Court and the issue once again arose before the Supreme Court with respect to the seat and the court's territorial jurisdiction. The Supreme Court relied upon the Balco case, the two other cases which are not referred to here, the Enercon case, which again refers to the international aspect of things, as well as the Reliance case. It said that, once again, very categorically held that party autonomy to choose a venue, to choose a seat, is really at the heart of this legislation. It is unlike CPC, where you are really restricted in terms of sections 16 to 20 as to where a suit can lie. So, and has again in this case held that even if the seat is totally unrelated to the cause of action, the seat is where the parties will need to arbitrate, and the court where the seat is will have the appropriate jurisdiction. So in this case, the Honorable Supreme Court set aside the Delhi High Court order judgment and held that Bombay would be the seat since it is so contained in the agreement, and the Bombay courts would have jurisdiction over the dispute. This leads us to the next case of Union of India versus Hardy Exploration of 2019. So this case, in the middle of these 5 judgments, takes a slightly different path and doesn't come to the same conclusions and has eventually been overruled. But it is important to allude to it just to understand why it was not correct. So in Union of India versus Hardy Exploration, is actually again pertaining to an international case where the parties had agreed that the laws of India would apply to the arbitration, but the arbitration would be conducted in Kuala Lumpur. So the parties proceeded to arbitrate in Kuala Lumpur, and it is by way of a Section 34 that the they came to the Delhi High Court to have the award set aside. Now, Delhi High Court very rightly held that Part 1 of the Act and Section 34 therefore does not apply to an international arbitration. So Delhi High Court applied all the principles laid down prior, whether it was Balco or Enercon and the Shashoa principle as well, and held that it is an international award since the parties chose to properly have the matter, properly have it adjudicated in Kuala Lumpur. So assuming that, finding that, the Delhi High Court dismissed the 34. The Union of India approached the Honorable Supreme Court once again. Interestingly, the Honorable Supreme Court, relying on the fact that the arbitrator, even though the award was signed in Kuala Lumpur, the arbitration took place in Kuala Lumpur. It was upon the arbitral tribunal, as per Section 20, subsection 2 of the Act, to conclusively state that Kuala Lumpur is the seat and not only the venue. This is how the Supreme Court really interpreted it. Even though, it was to be adjudicated properly and was adjudicated and the award passed in Kuala Lumpur, the Supreme Court did not apply the Shashoa principle of the UK courts and of Balco, and held that the Section 34 is maintainable before the Honorable Supreme Court, before the Indian courts, since the seat was not Kuala Lumpur. Hardy Exploration, Union of India versus Hardy Exploration was eventually held to be incorrect in BGS Soma, which we will come to next. In the next case is BGS Soma versus NHPC of 2019. I think the judgment has been pronounced in December of 2019 with 3-judge bench. And the facts in this were that the parties had agreed to have the seat of arbitration at, there was an option of 2 locations of New Delhi and Faridabad. So eventually the parties chose New Delhi. That's where the arbitration was conducted. That is where the award was passed. And then one of the parties chose to go to the Faridabad court to have the award set aside under Section 34. The opposing party moved an application before the Faridabad court stating that it was not the appropriate forum. Since the seat was at New Delhi, the award was passed at New Delhi, and it is the Delhi courts that would have the appropriate jurisdiction. The Faridabad court correctly accepted the application and to send the petition, transfer it to the Delhi courts. The party approached Punjab and Haryana High Court in appeal. The Punjab and Haryana High Court held that the Faridabad court does have jurisdiction, even though the arbitration had been conducted and the award had been passed in New Delhi. The Punjab and Haryana court held that the Faridabad court has jurisdiction. So aggrieved by this, BGS Soma approached the Honorable Supreme Court. And this is again where there have been detailed findings with respect to seat party autonomy to select that seat, and relying upon, again, Balco and Indus Mobile, that either party can choose the seat. And when there is a selection between 2 seats, when the party has opted to choose and the other party participated in the proceedings, that is very much the seat. And then the courts of that particular seat would have the jurisdiction. It has also clarified certain aspects with regard to Section 42. Section 42, because this particular judgment has also actually observed the case of Antrix, which I haven't referred to, which again, one of the parties moved Bangalore, one of the parties moved Delhi, whereas the seat was to be Delhi. So the Supreme Court has held that simply because the party first chose to go to Faridabad does not make it the correct forum, because Section 42, when one reads it, can give the impression that it is the court that one approaches first. So assuming that, so the court that one approaches first should be the court that is the correct court after a comprehensive reading of Section 21E as well as 21. You know, it cannot be just any court, it has to be the correct court. Once it is the correct court, naturally the party, you know, but really speaking, Section 42 would in that sense come into play, and the first mover advantage of a party that a party can have would arise in a situation something like this, that the parties have not decided upon a seat in the agreement. They have really you know, left that to be decided later. There are two situations that would occur in a situation like that, two options really. One would be that the party who seeks, say for example, injunctive relief would approach the court as per the principles of Section 16 to 20 of the CPC, which would, as we all know, would mean the cause of action arises, the defendant resides, etc., or where the property is situated. So in that case, when there is no seat mentioned, definitely the party that moves, you know, the cause of action could have arisen in Delhi, but the defendant could be residing in Bombay. So depending on what is convenient to the party approaching the court, could approach either the Delhi or the Bombay court. It is only when, as I repeat, when there is there is no mention of seat in the agreement. As the other aspect is that when there is no mention, section here I would like to, which since I haven't touched upon Section 20 subsection 2, the arbitral tribunal can also decide the seat upon the first calling of the session. So really speaking, either the parties have decided in the agreement, or if they haven't decided, it's the arbitral tribunal that will decide the seat. And from there on, the arbitration proceedings really get anchored to that seat. And Section 42 has to be read with the other two sections that I've referred to, rather than just see it independently. So in the case of Antrix versus Devas, so in Delhi High Court, it was Devas versus Antrix, but Antrix had approached the Bangalore courts first. And eventually in this judgment, it has been categorically held that that the Delhi case would be maintainable and not the case before, the application before the Bangalore courts. So that pretty much covers BGS Soma. A similar situation arose in Hindustan Construction Company, that is 2020, as recent as 4th of March 2020. So in this, the arbitration clause was that the seat was to be, that it was to be conducted in Delhi. A dispute arose whether the, you know, Faridabad courts, and since the cause of action arose at Faridabad, whether the Faridabad courts would have jurisdiction or whether the Delhi courts would have jurisdiction. So the party had approached the Faridabad court. And once again, the Honorable Supreme Court said, in this actually, the judge at Faridabad, really the Supreme Court has observed that the court has misinterpreted BALCO, because in, you know, around about section, paragraph 96 of BALCO, there are certain aspects that say that courts have concurrent jurisdiction while interpreting section 2(1)(e). In BALCO, the Honorable Supreme Court has held that there would be this aspect of concurrent jurisdiction. So the court in Hindustan Construction has said that BALCO has been misinterpreted to only pick out sort of the concurrent jurisdiction aspect. So one has to keep in mind that the concurrent jurisdiction is only in cases when the seat, as we now understand it, is only when the seat is not mentioned at all in the agreement between the parties. It cannot be pick and choose that, you know, you can approach the court just because the cause of action arose there. So in this manner, it has also once again reasserted all the principles that have been laid down. So since it was made to, the application was made to the Faridabad court, the Faridabad court had no jurisdiction. It was made to the wrong court. So the principles of section 42 will not apply. As an overview, I would also like to state that the principles of CPC, section 2(1)(e) again gives the impression that, as per the principles of CPC, the party can approach any of the courts as per the principles of section 16 to 20. But that is not so after this line of judgments that we have seen. It is really seat-centric. Once chosen, there is no running away from the seat. Once the seat is chosen, the court is chosen. And it is only that court that will exercise supervisory and territorial jurisdiction over the arbitral proceedings in that respect. So I would now like to just take some illustrative questions and answer them just for a very practical overview. So though it may be a little repetitive, but we could just quickly go through that. So assuming that the first one is that the parties have entered into a contract at Bombay, the cause of action arose at Bombay, but the seat in the agreement was decided to be Delhi. So can the party approach the Bombay court for any injunctive relief or appointment of arbitrator, etc., or otherwise? The short answer is no. The seat is New Delhi, and therefore the appropriate court would be the New Delhi courts. The second illustration would be if there is also a chance that sometimes agreements can be very confusing. So the agreement states the seat to be New Delhi, that the arbitration shall be conducted in New Delhi, but the courts of Chandigarh will be the right courts to approach, will have jurisdiction. In this case, again, it may seem like since the agreement has already assigned the jurisdiction to Chandigarh courts, that the seat would be New Delhi and one would go to the court at Chandigarh. Again, that would not be the correct courts to go to. It is again, this is akin to Hardy. So it would be, the inappropriate court to approach. It is the Delhi courts that would have jurisdiction, since the arbitration seat is at New Delhi. The third illustration is that in the event that the parties have not specified a seat at all in the agreement. Now, what happens in that situation? So in that situation, either once they've appointed the arbitrator mutually, and the arbitrator calls for the hearing, the arbitrator really holds that XYZ place would be the seat and the place for the conduct of the arbitration proceedings, then that is one way to go about it. And in the event that you have not had the chance to go to the arbitral tribunal, or the arbitral tribunal has, you're not in agreement with that. So where would you file for, not in case of a section 9, but in a section 9, in such a situation when the agreement doesn't contain the seat, you could then use the principles of section 16 to 20 of the CPC to approach the appropriate court, whether it would be a Delhi or a Bombay. And here really the first mover advantage or the first mover would come into play as per section 42. So that covers, the play between the party autonomy as well as the first mover advantage. Of course, there is the other situation of, again, which Hardy covered, that where the contract is governed by the laws of India, and say the place of arbitration is at Hong Kong, and it is Hong Kong is the seat where the arbitration is to be adjudicated and the award to be passed. So in effect, everything to be governed well in terms in Hong Kong law. So can a section 11 really lie in India? Again, as per my understanding of all the judgments quoted, the Indian courts would not have jurisdiction, because in effect, really, the seat is Hong Kong. And even though the substantive law use may have been India, but it is not the courts of India that would have, supervisory jurisdiction over the arbitration at Hong Kong. It is the Hong Kong courts that the parties would need to approach. So that covers some of the questions. And I could summarize, but depending upon Shreya, I don't know, Shreya, if you want to take it from here, or if my 20 minutes are up, or I could continue. I'm not sure.
I'm Tulip could sorry about the timing, but I'm happy to take over whenever.
I could just summarize once again, Tulip.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll just quickly summarize and then I'll just hand it over to Shreya.
Yeah.
So I think I kind of already have, but just quickly, it's the party autonomy and the seat, which is the decisive factor. Once the seat is decided, it is the courts of that particular location that would have the jurisdiction over the arbitration proceedings. The principles of section 16 to 20 of the CPC do not strictly apply because arbitration in a sense is, an autonomous alternative dispute resolution system for which this has been granted to it. And the rest of it, I think, is pretty much covered in terms of when there is nothing mentioned, then the principles would apply. And that's the only time when the first mover advantage under section 42 would really be available to either of the parties. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot. That was very helpful and insightful. So now I would hand it over to Shreya.
Thank you. Thanks, Simran, for, I think, very beautifully setting out the landscape and describing all the judgments. I'll try as much as possible not to repeat anything, but my apologies in advance if I do. Before we really move into this entire debate on seat and venue of arbitration, I'd like to take a step back and see why is this distinction necessary? And what are the different kinds of laws that apply to an arbitration? Now, the first kind of law that would apply to an arbitration is the substantive law of the contract, which will be the law in accordance with which the parties' rights and obligations will be determined. The second is the procedure of the arbitration or the curial law, and that is only the procedural rules. So when a statement of defense shall be filed, when a statement of claim shall be filed, what interim relief the arbitrator can or cannot grant, constitution of the arbitrator, etc. And the third kind of law is the law of the seat. Now, the seat, as Simran has already said, is the domicile of the arbitration, and it is the single law which governs the validity of your arbitration award, and it would give the court's supervisory jurisdiction to give any sort of relief in aid of arbitration. And that is why it's very important. Now, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act does not use the word seat, it uses the word place. And in Balco, the Supreme Court has said that seat and place are interchangeably used for the purposes of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. Now, what is important to remember is that this is not a geographical location, but it is a legal construct. It is the legal framework in accordance with which your arbitration will be conducted and your award will be upheld or destroyed. Now, the concept of seat is not a new concept, because if we really look back to various legislations, if we go back to 1923 and the Geneva Protocol, that in itself recognizes that there is a court or a jurisdiction which governs the validity of an award. And it also recognizes that there are different kinds of laws which are applicable to an arbitration. So for instance, a validity of a submission to arbitration is subject to the applicable law. The validity of the award is subject to the law governing the place where the award was made. And this, of course, was imported into the Arbitration and Conciliation Act as well. And it can also be seen in the New York Convention. So it's not a new concept at all. In fact, even if we look at the 1940 Arbitration Act, it contemplates that only one court will have jurisdiction. That is very similar actually to Section 42 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. But Section 31 of the 1940 Act says that once an award has been filed in a particular court, no other court shall exercise jurisdiction in respect of that award. The general idea is that the intention of the parties must be given effect to, the autonomy of parties must be respected, and no party or litigant shall have the right to a second bite at the cherry. So once you've elected to go to a particular court, you can't then go to another court just because you feel you may have a more, you may get a better outcome there, or you may just want to harass your counterparty by filing proceedings in various jurisdictions and make them run around, essentially. That is the purpose. It's also important because in certain cases, what has happened is there has been a sort of overlap or confusion between the law governing the contract and the law which has jurisdiction over the award. For instance, in the Sumitomo judgment in 1997, the court held that since the law governing the contract was Indian law, even though the procedural rules that parties had opted for were ICC rules, and even though the seat of arbitration was London, UK, courts exercised jurisdiction to determine the validity of the award. Now, that is historical, and there have been a number of cases since which have set the position straight. But of course, the easiest situation would be if an arbitration clause was clear and said, okay, I have the substantive law governing parties is Indian law, so your contract will be governed by Indian law. The seat of arbitration shall be London, UK, so you know if you have to file and get an anti-suit injunction or file an application for setting aside an award, that would have to go to the courts of UK. And the procedure of arbitration shall be, let's say, LCIA rules. So the nitty-gritties of how the arbitration is to be conducted would then be LCIA. But these situations are far and few, and the courts have over time devised a number of criteria to really be looked into in order to determine what the intention of the parties was. To go back to 1992, where the court in NTPC versus Singer held that the test to be applied is really the closest and most real connection test. In order to determine what this connection is and which court has a real connection, there are a number of factors that could be looked into. So you can look at the place of the contract, the place of performance, the jurisdiction of courts, which in that case was the courts at Delhi, the residence of parties, the governing law of the contract. And all of these are factors which together will tell you, one, what parties intended, and two, which court practically has a connection to the dispute. Now, that is not to say that only a court which has connection to a dispute can be the seat, because in Indus Mobile versus Data Wind, the court made it clear that a seat of arbitration can be a neutral venue which has absolutely nothing to do with the cause of action or the residence of the parties. And therefore, it's not a hard and fast rule, but these are only guidelines which you can follow if there is no designation of a seat or a place, so to speak. Going forward, of course, in Enocon, India, the court considered that the venue of the arbitration was London, but everything else pointed to India being the seat, such as the substantive law being Indian law, Part 1 being made applicable to the arbitration, and Indian courts having supervisory jurisdiction. I will not go into Hardy Exploration, BGS, Soma, Balco, etc., because I think those have already been covered in quite some detail. But let's only look at is the right that parties have to designate a seat or designate a governing law, is that an absolute right, or is that right subject to certain restrictions? The answer is that right is subject to certain restrictions because if, for instance, substantive law of the contract, Section 28 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act says that where the place of arbitration is in India, in a case other than an international commercial arbitration, the substantive law governing the rights and obligations of parties will have to be Indian law. Now, that also follows a line of judgments which says that it is part of the public policy of India not to allow Indian parties to derogate from Indian law or to opt out of Indian law in that sense. So that is one restriction which is imposed by law. Of course, even this has developed through case law, where various courts have taken different views. The first case in that sense would, I think, be TDM Infrastructure, where the court, as part of its obiter, said that it is not possible for Indian parties to opt out of Indian law. After that, this was also followed by the Bombay High Court in the other mercantile case. The Madhya Pradesh High Court took a slightly different view in that it said if the seat of arbitration is outside India, the governing law will also follow the seat and will therefore be outside India. And parties, since the arbitration agreement is separable from the rest of the contract, it is open for parties to opt out of Indian law. The Supreme Court upheld this view, and even the Delhi High Court in the case of GMR Energy versus Doosan held that it is possible for two Indian parties to choose a foreign seat of arbitration. This foreign seat of arbitration is also, there are a number of factors to consider when you are choosing this seat of arbitration, and that is how arbitration friendly is the jurisdiction that you are opting for. Historically, jurisdictions like the UK, Singapore, Geneva have been considered to be arbitration friendly jurisdictions because there is, courts tend to not interfere in arbitral awards to the extent possible, and they respect the sanctity of arbitration. Today, I think we're in a position where we can safely say that Indian law is following that trend. And even in India, more and more courts are declining to interfere with awards. Now, there are also, another controversy is the applicability or not applicability of Part 1, which Simran has dealt with. And we go back to Bhatia first to see what the court held, in which case the court said that Part 1 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act will be applicable to even foreign seated arbitrations unless it is expressly excluded by the parties. Following Bhatia, we had Venture Global, where a Section 34 petition was entertained by Indian courts purely because it had not been expressly excluded. However, we then got Balco, which clarified the position and said that Part 1 is not applicable to a foreign seat. This was, however, retrospective in nature. But in 2014, we had Reliance versus Union of India, which made it clear that Indian courts do not have jurisdiction where Part 1 has been excluded, and where the seat of arbitration is outside of India. In addition to the provisions that Simran pointed out, I would also just like to take you through a few more. Of course, first we have Section 21E, which deals with a definition of a court and which courts would have jurisdiction. And that goes to courts which are not being less than the principal court of civil jurisdiction, which would have territorial jurisdiction over the subject matter or the cause of action as it would in a suit. Then we have section 2.2, which says that part 1 shall only apply where the place of arbitration is in India, except for sections 9, 27 and 37. That gives parties slight flexibility because, of course, when you're confronted with a situation like your seat of arbitration is in Singapore, but you need urgent interim relief, you can, of course, go to Singapore courts, or you can go to, if it's before the SIAC, you can get an interim order from there. But there you have a difficulty of enforcing that interim order in India, because interim orders passed by foreign courts are not as easily enforceable. As opposed to that, if your subject matter is in Bombay or New Delhi, you can have recourse to section 9 and get an injunction from the court. That is now a possibility. Similarly, if you need the court's assistance in collecting evidence, you can go to the court where the evidence is located, and it makes your life much, much, much easier. There is also section 6 and section 19. So section 19 gives parties the power to agree to procedural rules, and that takes us to the curial law, which is why parties can always agree to have either an institution govern the procedure of arbitration, or they can, in the agreement itself, list out the procedure, or as we very commonly see in arbitrations, you have your famous procedural order number 1, which lays down the entire procedure that will be followed through the arbitration. There's also section 6, which permits an arbitrator, with the consent of parties, to appoint any administrative assistance, either a person or an institution, to provide that assistance, which normally would be provided by an institute. So if you go to MCI for an arbitration, MCI will take care of the administrative aspects for you, and you do not need to appoint somebody else. I've already gone through section 28. Section 20, I think, has been dealt with in some detail already by Simran. But let's also take a look at the provisions relating to an award. So section 31 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act specifically requires the place of arbitration to be mentioned. This place of arbitration is very important, because if the place of arbitration is Bombay, then your section 34 application challenging the validity of that award can only be filed in Bombay and in no other court. And I think with that, I'm a little shy of 20 minutes, but I think I've covered everything that I had slated for now.
Okay, thanks a lot. That was very helpful. Now we have some questions with us that we would like to start on. The first one is, what is the relevance of the seat versus venue debate in the era of globalization or deglobalization?
So just to take that, the seat versus venue debate is, I think, irrespective of globalization or not globalization, it certainly is relevant, because as we spoke about earlier, your venue is only a convenient location. And today, given the COVID-19 situation, for instance, it's very important for parties to designate a seat of arbitration. And most hearings will probably happen via video conference. So you could have one arbitrator sitting in Bombay, one arbitrator sitting in Delhi, one arbitrator sitting in Calcutta, parties in, say, Bangalore. And that would lead to some amount of confusion, because there are various venues of arbitration, but there can only be one seat. And that is the relevance of appointing a seat.
Simran ma'am, you would like to add something to it?
Yeah. So as Shreya has very correctly said, that especially given the pandemic, or even in other situations where it could be held remotely or at convenient venues, I think the importance still remains, and which is what led the courts to really, link the two, the seat with the territorial and the supervisory jurisdiction of courts, is that imagine having an award today and parties simply, wanting to challenge it, going to two different courts. So in the absence of having decided that which would be the appropriate court, it's naturally also a loss of time for both parties to, really go to the correct court, because by the time a judgment comes, given the backlog in the country, I mean, it could have been several months or a year or so. So, I mean, it gives the parties clarity as to which court to really approach. I mean, in terms of challenging by way of a Section 34, say, for example. So, in that sense, I think it's very, very important that the seat is linked with the jurisdiction of a court, so the parties know exactly where to go once they are done with the arbitration, and even otherwise, whether it's injunctive relief. So it is because otherwise, parties naturally over the years have been going either to court A or to court B, which results in a loss of time and eventually in a loss. I mean, that's detrimental to business, in the long run for both parties.
Okay, the other question is, will a statement in the contract identifying the seat of arbitration control its determination?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Will a statement in the contract identifying the seat of arbitration control its determination?
Control its determination means how the award would be adjudicated?
Yeah.
In terms of, I think, as far as India domestic is concerned, I don't think that really is going to make much of a difference whether, because the same Arbitration Act rules would apply, whether an institution like MCIA would, handle the administrative part of things, but the rules remain the same within India. So for India, if you have decided a Bangalore versus a Delhi or a Bombay, the rules pretty much are the same for a domestic arbitration. So the arbitration has to be conducted in a particular manner and determined in a particular manner. Now, I'm not talking about, naturally the outcome of the award, because that is not dependent on the place or the rules. That's really dependent upon how the substantive law, the dispute is adjudicated with the substantive law and how the tribunal adjudicates. So in India, I don't think that really makes a difference where you are, except naturally people are preferring the larger cities. But as far as international is concerned, like Shreya, I think could answer that part of things. It makes a difference, I think, to that extent.
And just to add to what Simran said, if parties were to specify or identify a seat of arbitration in their contract, what the court will then do, if it is confronted with a situation where the seat is called into question, it will look at the contract as a whole, and it will, using the words or interpreting the words that have been used in the contract by the parties, determine what the parties intended. Of course, if parties were to say seat of arbitration shall be X, that will weigh in favor of that particular location being designated as the seat. Unless, as I think the wording used in BGS SOMA were, if I may borrow them, which is unless there are strong contrary indicia to indicate otherwise.
Okay, thank you. The other one is that, can you shed some light on the future evolution of arbitration facing global markets and its interpretation in Indian context as well as for Indian law firms? Future evolution of arbitration facing global markets.
I think as far as Indian markets are concerned, more and more parties are opting for arbitration as opposed to, traditional litigation. And that is for a number of reasons. One, because it tends to be much more time effective. I wouldn't say cost effective, because arbitration does tend to be more expensive. But I think when you weigh it against the number of years that you will waste in court as opposed to an arbitration, it evens out at the end of the day. And it's also because courts in most jurisdictions are letting arbitrations be conducted as parties intended without interfering too much into them. So for the future of arbitration in the globalized markets, I think there's a bright future. There's a long way to go, but we're certainly taking steps in the right direction. Also because most government contracts now are also prescribing dispute resolution by way of arbitration. And that, I think, is the biggest indicator.
I think I agree with Shreya on that. Definitely, the court's attitude that has changed towards the way awards are upheld rather than being interfered with on a constant basis, as used to happen earlier. It is a good sign for arbitration, and like she rightly pointed out, a very pertinent point, that a lot of government undertakings and the government itself have arbitration clauses because. Well, ironically, the government, I guess, is aware of the time lag involved when you go to court.
Okay, so the other question that we have with us is dilemma in arbitration clause of contract regarding seat and venue, and how to resolve the same if there's a dilemma in the arbitration clause.
I think that's been addressed by us in the class per se, but I think like Shreya rightly said, with respect to when there is nothing mentioned, in my view, when there is nothing mentioned, and simply there are really two options. One is that you approach the place that you want your arbitration to be seated. You either appoint an arbitrator and you call the tribunal, and the tribunal mutually appoint an arbitrator and the tribunal decides the seat. That is section 20 subsection 2. The other option that parties in a very practical manner that they normally do is they will move a section 9 to a particular court to make that as the venue. But I think your question was really that how do you solve the dilemma? So that dilemma is, I think, that you have to take into account several of the factors, whether it'll have to be something connected with the seat, it cannot just be something totally at random. I mean, of course, there is party autonomy, so it can be at random. But if it's not contained, then these are the two practical approaches that mostly parties resort to. And when there are two places mentioned, then like we have discussed, it will be the factor whether the case was to be properly adjudicated. Actually, that was held in the case of Mankatsu Impex, which was decided as recently again on 5th of March. That if the proper adjudication of the dispute was done at X place, say there were two places mentioned, Bombay and Delhi, and the parties chose to do it at Delhi, and one of the parties approached Bombay as for appealing the award, then the court will have to go into the question as to whether the proper adjudication was done in Delhi, or say, for example, internationally, or Hong Kong or Singapore. Then if everything was substantively held there, then that is what the courts have now consistently held will be the right, the seat. That will be deemed to be the seat and not merely a venue. So there will be factors surrounding it in the facts of a case to decide whether a venue is a seat and not merely a venue. But Shreya, you added some points there with respect to venue. You said there were some factors, so those would need to be looked.
Yeah, those factors would need to be looked into. As a general rule, seat, venue, and place are three different terms with three different connotations. And when venue is to be construed as seat and when place is to be construed as seat, that completely depends on the wording used in the clause, which will tell you what exactly it is that which court has the most close connection, what parties would have intended, and you look at a number of surrounding factors. So it's also important to make sure that courts will always go for a seat which makes it easiest to adjudicate the dispute, and not something which will create further confusion.
Okay, thanks a lot. The other question is, how effective is UNCLOS in dispute management?
Sorry, what? How effective is?
UNCLOS, that is the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, and how effective it is in dispute management.
I'm not aware of how much we use it in India, but as regards probably international arbitrations, I'm not entirely certain of how effective it is over there, because largely I've seen the ICC rules or the SIAC rules being used. So, but Shreya could maybe answer.
So the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, of course, covers only a very small aspect of what is otherwise a large arbitration world out there. And I have I've not personally, done any matters which have been administered by the UNCLOS tribunal. However, I think if parties act responsibly, any mechanism or any administrative institution is effective.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, how can one make arbitration more effective in terms of avoiding post-arbitration litigation?
In order to avoid post-arbitration litigation, see, the first is where parties will raise their Section 34 application or enforcement. So if, of course, it's a foreign-seated arbitration, the question of a 34 application does not at all arise. I have personally seen in one case, it was an arbitration seated in London, and no application under Section 68 of the English Act was filed, but parties went and filed a Section 34 petition in a district court in Alwar, Rajasthan, which had absolutely nothing to do with the dispute, because the subject matter, the company which formed the subject matter of the arbitration, had its registered office in Bombay. So there was absolutely nothing. So one is, the party should be properly advised, is the first most important aspect. The second is, of course, you'll have to see where your challenge provisions lie. The third is, when you come to enforcement proceedings, the grounds for enforcement are properly laid down in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. It's important for parties to fit their challenge into those neat pigeonholes which have been provided for in the Act, and not try to bring anything and everything under the sun within that concept of public policy, which is what parties do more often than not. I think also it's just a fact, and I think it was a Privy Council case which said many years ago that a litigant's woes begin with enforcement, which is essentially after the award and not before. So it's a fact of life.
Yes, I think avoiding post-award litigation is not something one can avoid, because obviously the party is entitled to go to court if they want to challenge the award. And just adding a bit to that is that, in terms of the arbitration itself, I think the parties should really concentrate their energies in arbitrating well, be well represented, or, take good counsel, or, whichever way. So that really seals your fate. The arbitral award really seals your fate. I mean, that is what I have time and again seen in arbitral awards, that there is very little room now in a Section 34 to maneuver around unless something is patently perverse in the award. And with the increasing number of Section 11 appointments, there's also going to be very little room going forward for challenging, the very appointment of arbitrators. So that again makes it again a very, very watertight award once it comes.
Okay, thank you. Now the other question that we have received through chat is that he's saying that his question is in relation to regarding Section 21, 20 subclause 2 and Section 31 subclause 4. He says where the non-agreement between parties on place of arbitration under Section 20 give liberty to parties to apply to courts having concurrent jurisdictions, if the parties do not agree and the arbitrators don't specify.
Yes, then the person is free to go to the concurrent jurisdiction of where the cause of action, the principles of CPC would apply to approach the court.
But then he's adding to it and he's saying that the award records place to be Mumbai under Section 31(4). So do
the award has already been passed, you mean?
Yeah. So do we have to go to Mumbai for moving a Section 34 application?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The parties agreed. Neither of the parties really disputed. They both probably agreed to have that arbitration proceeding in Bombay. And once you've agreed to it and the award has been passed, and it's like Shreya pointed out, that you have to sign, the award has to be dated, and the name of the place has to be mentioned on the award. So yes, the court would be Bombay.
And just to add to that, also, if we look at what BGS Soma said, it said that in certain circumstances, arbitration proceedings or venue of arbitration which are terms used in the clause, if they are such as to imply that those proceedings will ultimately culminate in an award, then where those proceedings are held or what that venue is will be the seat of arbitration. And in this case, if the arbitrator has said that the place of arbitration is Mumbai in the award, then that settles the issue. I don't think there's much room to argue there.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. The other question is, which court will have jurisdiction in case no seat is mentioned in the agreement?
That was just answered, so I'll just repeat that. So once, if it's not mentioned, the party, the aggrieved party, whoever will be the first party to move, you would have to either appoint, like I said, it would be section 22, subsection 2. You would need to mutually appoint, under the new act, it's mutual appointment. You would need to appoint an arbitrator who will further decide the seat. That is one way of going about it when there's going to be no dispute on it. But if you want injunctive relief and you say want the seat to become New Delhi, you will approach either the New Delhi court where the cause of action arose, or the Bombay court where the, say a defendant resides, or where the agreement was executed. Then you could choose either of the courts in that situation. If you haven't used section 20 subsection 2, then you could use section 42 to go to, whoever moves first to whichever court, that court becomes the court, and then the seat would probably follow from that court.
So
Okay,
just to add, the beauty of arbitration or dispute resolution really is that in a lot of cases, there's no one right answer. So if there is no seat mentioned, a party can go to any court and file a section 9 application so as to trigger section 42. But when that section 9 application is filed, it's equally open for the counterparty to challenge the jurisdiction of that court to entertain the section 9 application altogether. And that is something which just has to play out.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now the other question is, what is the stand of asymmetric arbitration clause in India? Since we have referred to the Indus judgment, can you talk about the scope and the extent of section 42 in view of the Indus judgment of Supreme Court?
So I think we've dealt with that as well, because section 42 and the most recent pronouncement on that, where the court actually clarified all aspects, was in BGS Soma, and we've dealt with that. So a section 42 application would lie, and it would be applicable if the court which was first approached had proper jurisdiction in terms of the seat and in terms of the definition set out in section 21E of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. If that court does have jurisdiction, then yes, section 42 will apply, and that will be the court which will have exclusive jurisdiction as set out in Indus Mobile versus Datawind. If that court does not have jurisdiction, then just because a party wrongly filed an application before that court would not give it exclusive jurisdiction.
Simran ma'am, you would like to add anything to it?
I think that's about it. That covers it. She's put it very well.
Okay. So now we have 5 more questions with us. So if you will permit us with the time, if you can take it, otherwise.
I don't know, depending on the questions, if they're not, if something's been left out on some topic that we haven't answered, that's fine. Otherwise, I'd be happy to answer them otherwise.
Okay, ma'am. One of the question is that, can you shed some light on the crystallized law for this topic? This is summary procedure under SIAC rules for domestic and international transactions.
I'm not sure this was part of the topic at all. I don't understand how this is linked with this.
Okay, we'll take another one.
Yeah, there's a lot to say on summary procedure,
yes,
but that would lead into a whole
another. Yeah.
Okay, so can under any other circumstance jurisdiction be transferred or changed?
Circumstance
other
than what?
Other than what?
Other than what?
I think maybe Shreya is trying to ask that, like you said, when you move for a section 9, when it's not mentioned in the agreement, that's the only place I can think of that in a 9, it would be contested. One party has gone to Delhi and the other party wants to go to Bombay. So the party in Delhi would have to somehow show that that it lies in Delhi. If it's not able to show, then naturally then the defendant wins, and the matter, then he can institute the injunction, whatever the matter, say in Bombay, or Section 11 in Bombay, to start proceedings there.
Okay, ma'am, thanks a lot. So now I think we've wrapped up all the questions with us, and that was really insightful and helpful. And any other last words that you would like to talk to us about on this point?
No, I think it's been great to deal with all of these questions, mainly because it shows that everyone has a different view. Just to conclude, I recently heard Justice Nariman speak on seat and venue of arbitration at the GAR Live conference earlier in 2020, and what he said is that seat and venue is something which the position today takes us back to what it was during the Panchayati Raj, where only one particular village panchayat decided everything on the basis of their local customs and on the basis of what they believed to be moral. And that essentially is what your seat court does.
Yes, so I think just to add to that, that is very well put, and which is why it becomes important, as I think the first question put to us was, that the seat and the court also ought to be linked. And this is probably more relevant in the international scenario than in the domestic. In domestic, it's the same law that applies now, and of course not the local customs. But in terms of international arbitrations, this may be a slight reason why certain parties prefer to arbitrate outside of India, have their seat outside of India than India, because then the courts outside of India would have jurisdiction. So.
Okay, so thanks a lot for this, and it was really insightful, and for your exceptional insightful views, we're very thankful. And also for taking us through the case law section's latest news. This was indeed an insightful session on the debate of seat versus venue. And I would also like to thank all the attendees for being here with us. And for the recording, kindly subscribe to LegitQuest YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to LegitQuest.